Okay, and we're now live.
Okay, thank you. And is the recording?
Yep, and the recording started.
Wonderful, thank you very much. And good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for attending this morning. Your time is very much appreciated. Broughton District Council Appeals Panel meeting today, Wednesday, the 7th of April, 2021. The appeal we will consider today is Tree Preservation Order 2020 number 9, former Royal Norwich Golf Club, Drayton High Road, Helston. Before we proceed with the hearing today, I need to advise all in attendance this is a public meeting and is being recorded and live streamed on Broughton District Council YouTube channel. I would ask to please follow the general etiquette of remote meetings and please ensure your microphones are on mute to avoid any background noise, and please unmute yourselves when you wish to speak. Please raise a hand to the screen to indicate to myself or our host if you should wish to speak. Our host will advise me if I should miss your gesture, and I will come to you in turn. If I can now introduce the panel, I am Councillor Sue Lawn, Chairperson of the Appeals Panel, and my colleague alongside me today is Councillor Karen Lawrence. Apologies. Our Democratic Services Officer in attendance today will be Officer Don Matthews and Officer Jessica Hammond, and Officer Hammond will be our host for today. I'd like to welcome you all for your attendance this morning, and if you could please bear with us whilst we have a few housekeeping matters to deal with before we get to the matter of the tree preservation order. Please be advised today the hearing will follow the procedures as stated in the agenda, but it has been adapted to meet the needs particular to this case, being mindful of the unavoidable and changing restrictions imposed by COVID-19 for our meeting today. If I could please ask Officer Matthews to note the members in attendance this morning will be Karen Lawrence and myself, Councillor Sue Lawn. Thank you. We will now move to agenda item number 1 to receive declarations of interest. And if you'd
Thank
like
you, Chairman.
to
Yep. Could I ask if either yourself or Karen Lawrence have any declarations to make?
No declarations of interest.
No declarations.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. And agenda item number 2, apologies for absence.
No apologies, Chairman.
Thank you. And agenda item number 3, to confirm the minutes of the last meeting held on the 27th of February. As I'm the only councillor that was in attendance on that day, I can confirm the minutes for accuracy and confirm them as a true record. Okay, thank you. We will now move to agenda item number 4. And we are here to determine whether or not to confirm the order having regard to representation received from the landowner Persimmon Homes Limited and also local residents, the local member, the Parish Council, and we will have regard to all representations today and all written representations, including anyone not able to attend today. And the order is Broughton District Tree Preservation Order 2020 number 9, former Royal Norwich Golf Club, Drayton High Road, Helston. Okay, so the procedure is set out in the agenda. We cannot hold the meeting in council offices because of COVID restrictions, and as with all other council meetings, it's being held remotely. Procedure number 1, the site visit. The 2 members of the panel have carried out a site visit, and we are happy that we have seen sufficient whilst we were on that visit, and it was done whilst we were within the social distancing rules. We will now move to the hearing, and we have objectors first, and I would like to invite, if you can just bear with me just 2 seconds, we will invite Alison Cornish and Stephen Milligan to put their case forward, please. And Alison or Stephen, which one of you would like to go first, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I'll make our opening statement, and Stephen Milligan is here in his professional capacity to answer any technical questions or any questions members may have. We'll just set out our statement then. This is our opening statement opposing the imposition of the TPO on this site. Persimmon Homes' position is as follows. Persimmon are of the strong view that the proposed order is inappropriate and unnecessary and should not be confirmed. The reasons explained in the written submission of the 9th of November 2020, enclosed with the appeal panel report and highlighted in this opening statement, Persimmon considered that it is not expedient to make the order in the interests of amenity, and therefore the legal test that section 198 of the Town and Country Planning Act 1990 is not met. I would like to highlight to members that they need to assess whether there are sufficient amenity grounds to confirm the order with regard to the condition and visibility of the trees, and whether it is expedient to confirm the order with regard to the risk to such trees. In summary, Persimmon's position is that the trees are already under good arboricultural management. There is no threat to the trees on the site which would merit an emergency TPO. A number of the trees on the site are not of a condition which would warrant a TPO protection, and in any event, the trees have been subject to assessment throughout the planning processes, which have been ongoing for over 6 years. The majority of the trees on the site are not visible from public viewpoints and therefore make a limited contribution to amenity. And in any event, the order in its current form is inappropriate as it covers areas of the site with detailed approval, namely phases 1 and 2, where permission has been recently granted for the removal of a number of trees. Turning then to the details of our case, I would like to begin by addressing a point raised on page 16 of the appeal panel report, that the order was made following reports to local members about tree work carried out on phases of the development which are not subject to construction work at that time, and because of concerns about tree removal on the site. Persimmon's position on this is that other than on phases where detailed plan permission has been granted and the precise detail of tree removal and retention has been formally approved in planning conditions, any and all works to trees that have been carried out on the site have been carried out following engagement by Persimmon with the District Council. Persimmon anticipate that the work referred to on page 16 of the report are either the clearing of scrub land, including small saplings, to facilitate the accurate surveying of trees, or works to trees on the boundary of phase 3 of the development, which are works requested by local residents and Helston Parish Council, and which were only carried out following a site visit attended by Broadlands District Council's tree officer, the case officer, local member and representatives from Helston Parish Council, and subsequent approval being given in writing by Broadlands District Council. Persimmon have no intention of altering from this established practice of engaging with the District Council before works are done to trees on the development site. Persimmon have engaged an arboriculturalist in connection with the development at Royal Norwich, who is available today to take questions, and take their responsibilities towards the trees on this site very seriously. The government's planning practice guidance in paragraph 10 indicates that it is unlikely to be necessary to make an order in respect of trees which are under good arboricultural management. Persimmon consider that the orders are necessary given their ongoing management of the trees on Royal Norwich Golf Club site. Indeed, Persimmon were of the view that it had been agreed with the District Council that individual group or woodland tree preservation orders would be served for each phase of the development once detailed plan permission had been granted for the respective phase, and tree removal and retention had been formally agreed through the planning process. This approach was confirmed by the case officer in an email dated 22nd of November 2019. As members will know, the area is envisaged only offers protection for trees standing at the time it was made, i.e. October 2020, and would fail to protect any new trees introduced as part of the development of each phase. Persimmon would be quite content for TPOs to be imposed on a phase-by-phase basis as detailed permission is granted to allow for the long-term protection of both existing trees and new trees on each phase of the development. In addition, to allay any concerns that members may have, Persimmon would be prepared to give an undertaking that no established trees would be removed from the site as a whole in the area covered by the made order, excluding areas where detailed permission has been granted and construction work is ongoing, without first consulting with the District Council until detailed permission has been granted for the part of the site in question, at which point tree removal and retention would be governed by the detailed permission for that phase. This would be subject to exclusions for carrying out works to protect trees in the 2012 regulations, of course. Turning then to the principle of the development and tree removal, it is allocated for the development of 800 to 1,000 homes in the Council's current local plan. This allocation, adopted in May 2016, accepted the principle of tree removal on the site. As detailed in Persimmon's written objection at paragraphs 22 to 28, a number of planning permissions have been granted in respect of the site since 2016 for up to 1,000 dwellings. Persimmon's outline plan application was supported by landscape evidence, This evidence highlighted that the value of the golf course landscape is limited to boundary vegetation and ridgeline trees. Not all of the trees on the site contribute towards this value, reinforcing Persimmon's view that this blanket area order is inappropriate and not supported by the evidence. Persimmon's planning applications have been supported by arboricultural impact assessments, which set out individual and groups of trees to be lost, those to be retained in part and those to be retained in full. These impact assessments have been approved and now form the framework for the development of the site in terms of tree removal. Planning conditions on the extant outline planning permission for the development, conditions 13 and 14, require details of existing trees and those trees to be retained or removed to be submitted and approved by the District Council before the development of any phase or parcel of the development. Persimmon have no intention of unnecessarily carrying out works or removing any trees on parts of the development yet to receive planning permission, as Persimmon is conscious of its responsibilities under these conditions and wishes to ensure that we can comply with these conditions at the point a detailed planning application is granted for that phase. The principle of tree removal has already been accepted and the existing planning decisions provide for sufficient protection of trees on the site. Turning then to the detailed points in Borden District Council's case, as set out at paragraph 37 of Persimmon's written representation, members must consider whether an area TPO is the correct form of order here. Government guidance sets out that an area TPO such as this order is intended for short-term protection in an emergency and may not be capable of providing long-term protection. As I have already set out, Persimmon do not consider that there is any such emergency here and are prepared to make further assurances in this regard to allay any fears members have about this. The District Council's tree officer appears to accept on pages 13 and 17 of the report that some of the trees on the site have defects that could adversely affect their long-term retention and that some of the trees on the site are not worthy of protection. This view is borne out by, for example, their agreement to the felling of the poplar trees on the northern boundary of Phase 2. Persimmon agree that a number of the trees on the site simply are not appropriate for protection. This view is set out in the AIA approved as part of the Outline Planning Commission, which identifies the areas of lower value trees to be removed. It is therefore not appropriate to protect these trees with an area TPO. Such trees make no contribution to amenity as required by Section 198 of the Town and Country Planning Act 1990. And this means that the order does not satisfy the requirements for a tree preservation order. Indeed, the scope of the order is already out of date and inappropriate. The order's area covers phases 1 and 2 of the development, where detailed planning permission has already been granted and precise detail of tree removal and retention has already been agreed and secured. For example, the most significant oak trees within Phase 2 have been retained within the detailed layout, whilst the poplars on the northern boundary will be felled. There is certainly no emergency warranting the protection of any trees on Phases 1 and 2, as any protection required is already secured by planning condition on these areas, and amenity has already been assessed in detail here. For this reason alone, the order in its current form does not meet the legal tests and should not be confirmed. If the order was confirmed in its current form, it would already be ineffective and out of date in respect to Phases 1 and 2 of the development. In addition, Persimmon would have no guarantees as to whether and when the District Council would review the order to provide protection only to such trees which merit it. The site also remains in private ownership. The majority of the trees on the site cannot be viewed from publicly accessible vantage points. Private viewpoints are generally limited by boundary vegetation, which would, in the main, be retained with the exception of the area required to create the main site access of Low Road being cleared and a linear group of leyland cypress poplar trees along the industrial estate boundary being removed. This limits the amenity value that the trees within the internal areas of the site provide, and Persimmon's case is that the area order that is proposed does not meet the relevant tests, as the majority of the trees that it looks to protect do not contribute towards amenity. Persimmon are somewhat surprised that no detailed assessment of the trees on the site has been carried out over the past 6 months since the order was made in October 2020, and do not consider that the COVID-19 related restrictions should have prevented this, given this is work which would have been done outside. Indeed, even if COVID-19 restrictions did prevent such work, then the work to assess the trees on Phases 1 and 2 could have at least been done as a paper exercise, as detailed retention has already been agreed by the District Council through the granting of detailed planning permission. Indeed, Persimmon is further surprised that at no point in allocating this site or considering its development in detail, whether at the Outline Planning Commission or Reserve Matters stages, have the Council carried out a tempo assessment of any of the trees. Furthermore, the council still have not looked at phase 1 following reserve matters approval in May 2019 to identify which trees should be protected by TPOs following completion of the development. This action would have ensured the continued protection of the trees within this phase with an appropriate form of TPO. Therefore, we are slightly confused as to why such an emergency situation has been cited as a justification for the imposition of this area TPO. Despite the officer's indications on page 12 in the report that the District Council would reclassify the trees if the order was confirmed, Persimmon have severe concerns as to whether and when this would be done, given it appears that no work in this regard has been done in the previous 12 months, which Persimmon would have expected this was a case of acting urgently in response to a threat to trees that warranted protection. Officers indicate at page 13 of the appeal panel report that they consider it is better for residents to move to property with an existing TPO in place rather than serve one once the houses are occupied. Persimmon agree with this in principle, but do not consider that the area order is the best way to achieve this. Persimmon consider that confirming the area order will now actually cause confusion, as it will only be effective in respect to trees standing in October 2020. Future residents will be in doubt as to whether the trees on the site were in place on this date or not, and therefore unsure as to whether they benefit from protection or not. This would undoubtedly increase inquiries for District Council officers and increase the risk of protected trees being felled inadvertently. Persimmon considered the better approach would be not to confirm the order, but instead confirm individual orders relating to each phase of the development once the detail of tree retention, removal, and new tree planting has been agreed on a phase-by-phase basis. The approach previously agreed in 2019. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. Councillor Lawrence, can I ask, do you have any questions for Ms Cornish?
I suppose, yes, a couple referring to the condition in the original paragraph 13 and 14 that require Persimmons to identify all of the trees with a number, etc. That has only been done for the area that has got the permission so far for the 108 houses and not for the other phases. Is that correct?
Yes, it was completed for phase 1 to discharge those 2 conditions, and we're in the process of compiling the information now for phase 2.
And would that not be available to Broadland District Council? I'm just surprised that we didn't have any details from yourselves about the trees that were there on site and their maturity, given they were clear conditions in the original planning permission, and the length of time which yourself you were concerned about, sort of after such a period of time, why this TPO was being brought forward. I was wondering why you have not, over that same period of time, why you yourselves have not had time to do the tree assessment.
We have, basically, before we submitted the outline plan application, we had prepared a full AIA for the site, which was the information that the plan was based on, that identified the trees to be removed completely, the trees to be retained in part, and the trees to be retained in their entirety. That plan actually informed the basis of the outline planning application and also the indicative master plan that was approved, and that is the document that has been used as the baseline to form the detailed reserve matters applications which were submitted to date. And what we've done when we've submitted those detailed reserve matters applications is that they are supported by a detailed AIA and method statement, which is particularly relevant to that particular phase, which identifies all the trees, their age, their size, their species, and that is what's then being used as another layer, if you like, to determine where we're actually putting the development. And that has been discussed in full with Broadland District Council. We conducted a site meeting with them when phase 2 in particular was being considered, and the layout of that phase was altered to take account of the larger trees that Broadland, despite them being given permission under the outline to be removed, that we said that we would retain because they were the more important trees. So at each point, we have provided the detailed assessments and information to inform the development that we're asking permission for. And we have spent many months surveying the site as a whole. So we now have a very good portfolio of information in terms of the actual position of the trees being surveyed, and then their canopies and the species being identified. So we have a vast portfolio of information that we have pulled together, but at no point have the council to date come out on site and walked the site in detail with us and looked at the trees that are to be retained or removed. That is an exercise which we have committed to undertaking going forwards, to look at each phase with the council, with the tree officer in detail, based on the survey information that we've got, information that was submitted and approved at the outline, to then agree in detail which trees are going to be removed, which trees are going to be retained, and which areas of trees where they've shown as being removed in part are actually going to be retained. So we have done a huge amount of work in identifying and getting to know the trees on the site. Our concern is that the council, it's more than 4 years now since the outline planning permission was granted. We have worked constantly with the council to identify how we're going to proceed with this scheme. We've made them aware of the other constraints that we're now working with. So we feel that we've had a good dialogue with the council to date on agreeing what can and can't go. And we have based those decisions and that information discussions on all the information that we've gathered to date. But the council now have decided to put a TPO 4 years after an outline permission was granted, and the site is located as well. And interestingly, the inspector, when they looked at the draft policy, didn't raise the issue of the trees on the site being a significant amenity, having a significant amenity value.
Okay, and just for clarification, the maps and the plans that we had are 100% accurate. My understanding was that they have changed and we don't yet have the updated plans, etc. And there have been changes due to site considerations that you were not originally aware of when that master plan was developed. Is that correct?
When the master plan was put together, obviously the information was done on because it was a master plan and it was indicative, and the areas of trees, the boundaries of the areas of trees were surveyed and were pinpointed accurately. What then happens is when you're coming to doing the detailed development, you then go into those areas in more detail, get them accurately surveyed, because obviously at that point you're then plotting houses exactly where the tree canopies are, where the root and protection areas need to be. So at that point, you then do a more detailed survey and pinpoint exactly the extent of the group of trees that you're retaining, where the tree canopies extend for individual trees. And that is the point you then start basically layering up the information that you've got on the tree cover on the site. What's happened since the site was allocated and since indeed the original outline application was considered, is that there is a surface water flow path that now has been confirmed as running between phases 2 and 3 on the eastern side. The drainage requirements for the imposed by the LLFA have now been tightened as well, requiring more land to be used for drainage. And then obviously you've got the topography, which we were aware of the topography obviously on the site, but that imposes additional restrictions once you started taking out land for drainage and everything else. And we're aware of the trees, but it was a balancing exercise, if you like, between the tree retention, surface water flow path drainage. But then also what happened was the Housekeeping Parish Council at the last minute, when the outline was determined, wanted 2 hectares of playing pitches included on the site, which again have to be cleared of trees. So all these things are starting to sort of put pressure on the land that we actually have available for development. But at no point are we going to fell good quality trees on the site. It's our intention to develop a scheme which has got a lot of amenity benefit, which is derived in part from the tree presence on the site.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank
you, Councillor Lawrence. I don't have any questions for you just at this moment in time, but now we will open the questions to the rest of the people in attendance today. So can I ask, is anyone in attendance would like to ask Ms. Cornish any questions, please? Could you raise your hand? Okay, Councillor Gurney.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to correct something that Mrs. Cornish has just said about, at the last moment, Helston Parish Council wanted 2.2 hectares of land. It was not at the last moment. It was right from the inception. We wanted our rightful entitlement of formal recreational space. And Ben Burgess knows this quite correctly. It wasn't a last moment throw-in decision from the Parish Council. And in fact, we were entitled to 4.2 hectares of land, and we only got 2.2, but it was not at the last moment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That's been stated. Did you have any questions in relation to what Ms. Cornish has said?
No, I wanted to correct on a point of order.
That's fine.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. It has been noted. Thank you. Okay, anyone else? Any further questions? Any further questions for Mr. Milligan? No. Okay, thank you very much for your time, Alison. It's really appreciated. Okay, we will now move on to, it will be the, let's have a look. Council's Advocate, Officer Mole, if I could please ask you to introduce your case for the order.
Oh, good morning, Chair, Appeals Panel. Thank you, Alison. It's my understanding that we are still waiting for the detailed information of the trees. I think Mr. Milligan has said that the tree groups in whole that will be removed will not be surveyed in detail, but the groups in part will be. We'd be expecting more detailed information of the trees. And as Alison Cornish has rightly pointed out, we are now ready to serve a varied TPO on the phase 1 and 2 now that we have the agreed layout, but you don't vary a provisional TPO, you only vary a confirmed order, so we're not ready to do that yet. It's not the right time. So I don't know what we wanted to run through in terms of the site history maybe, or I don't know.
If you could please give us your reasonings for issuing the TPO, please.
Sure, okay. So I'm just going to share my screen now to have a look a bit of the history. I think we're sharing now.
It's not coming to me. It's not coming to us, Imogen. It is now. It is now.
Ah, okay. So we can see on the tithe map, this boundary along here is the Helston High School boundary, and this is the area that was discussed quite in detail at the phase 2 application recently. There will be a retained vegetation strip, and you can see some of the area in that would be the western side of the site. The RAF image capture shows the site pretty treeless. The woodland area there is in situ, and then going on to the 1988 map, you can see the golf course layout is now sort of more like what we can see today with groups of trees. So actually relatively fairly young tree stock, but established, certainly lacking any evidence of veteran or ancient trees, but still substantial. And then the most recent aerial map there showing pretty much what we've got today. So relatively young landscape, but still I think the general feeling is that it's important in terms of local amenity. And you can see here the master map layout showing quite significant changes actually that have happened over the phases of development that have come forward. And there we go, the maps of groups of removal. So you can see here in this area, the 2 oak trees that were initially looked to be retained, and then the revised site layout showing those trees actually then retained. So it's been difficult for us to sort of get a grip on, the historic changes and it is a very detailed application as it's come forward. We have adapted, and Persimmons, to be fair, have adapted too. When we've asked for the changes to come forward, they have done that. And there is an opportunity, I think, to retain more trees, integrate more, and this order really has pushed matters to the fore, and we've got a much closer working relationship now than maybe historically. And being on site, yes, it has been difficult, but we have now been on site twice with Stephen Milligan and looked at the detailed layouts as the phases have come forward. But I think really the strong response to the area order does demonstrate how residents do value these trees, and that they do provide the amenity. I don't think there's any question that they are valued. So yeah, I don't know whether there's any questions or any points that you wanted to talk through.
Thank you. Councillor Lawrence, do you have anything that you would like to ask of the officer?
Yes, just a clarification in terms of we talked on the site about the amenity value or from different viewpoints in the city on this site. Have you had any kind of insights from that in terms of, I suppose, we could see City Hall from where we stood, so that sense of kind of not just a local amenity value, but sort of, from other vantage points in the city, have we got a sense of the amenity and amenity value of the site from that perspective as well?
In terms of the wider landscape, it's not an assessment that I've carried out, although I'm sure the planning officers have. They are up in a raised profile, aren't they? You can see them from a distance, some of the trees, but no, it's not something that we've carried out in detail.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask, in relation to the habitat of the wildlife and the biodiversity of the trees, could you give us some further information in relation to that?
So many of the trees are native species. There's a good mix in the woodland areas, and you can see from the historical maps that those woodland areas were established prior to 1946, I think it showed. So there's a long history of tree cover on the site, and those woodland areas, to be fair, are largely retained. And again, those woodland hedgerow areas are established wildlife corridors that spread out into the local area. So it's really important, although there was a bit of smiles at the hedgehog features in fences and things, but actually that's really important. Those small wildlife adaptations to the detail in the planning is important, but the trees themselves, they are predominantly native broadleaf, so really important.
And is there any specific birds nesting or anything unusual happening in that area?
Not that I'm aware of, but it's likely that there are nesting birds at this time of the year generally, so it wouldn't surprise me.
But, okay,
Chairman, can I just say we've got Councillor King has entered the waiting room. Are you happy for him to join the meeting?
Yes, and we can determine. I think, is he just joining us now to
observe? I would imagine.
Yes, as he's heard
I'm
the
not sure
first
what
part.
capacity. Yeah, we may need to clarify with him when he joins us what capacity he's joining us.
Okay, apologies, Imogen. Just bear with us just a moment. Okay, Councillor King, thank you for joining us this morning. And I just need to clarify, sorry, if you could just please clarify for me that you are now just observing the situation, as you didn't hear the opening words of the objector.
Yeah, I do apologise. My brother got rushed to hospital this morning.
Okay.
So I've been up the entire night. So I do apologise for being late, but
no, that's fine.
Yeah,
we just wanted to clarify that you were happy just to observe.
I've missed the first half hour, so thank you very much.
Okay, lovely. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, apologies, Imogen. We can now move to, I don't have any further questions at this moment. So we can now leave it open now for anyone else in attendance of the meeting. Do you have any questions for Officer Mole? Okay, Alison?
Yeah, the question I've got is, why hasn't the council actually taken or undertaken any more assessment of the trees themselves at this stage? It seems that we've been the ones that have sort of been pulling all together all the information, and the council haven't sort of done any assessment of the trees since the site was allocated or even permission granted. I just wonder why that work hasn't been done to sort of help sort of us identify and agree, which trees that they think are of importance and therefore need to be retained and which ones can go. It seems that we haven't actually sort of got out on site and had a look to see what's out there, bearing in mind that there is obviously going to be a development on the site.
Okay.
I just wonder why that hasn't happened yet.
Okay, thank you. I'll just ask Imogen to reply, please.
Yeah, I think Ben's got his hand up, but I think, historically, or generally speaking, that is the planning process, that information is provided with the application. I think other tree officers in post previous to me have been out on site, and I think in phase 1 and indeed phase 2 we are ready to vary the order. Ben, did you want to say something?
Okay.
Is that okay, Chair?
Yes, that's absolutely fine, Ben. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Sorry, just in case people don't know me, I'm Ben Burgess. I'm the manager of the Majors team. Imogen's in my team, and we look after the tree side of things as well as various other big schemes that we have. And I was the original officer who dealt with the outline application for this scheme. Subsequently, one of the other officers, Charles Judson, has taken this on, but I've still been overseeing it. So that's my background. There's a number of things perhaps to pick up on, but I'll just respond to that question first of all, and then I'll ask you, Chair, afterwards if it's worth me picking up on another couple of things, but we'll see where we get to. I think that's a little unfair, to be honest, in terms of saying that we've not been out on the site before. We've got a long tradition and history with working with developers, and on this site in particular with our tree officer who is still with us, Mark Simons. It's just that Imogen has taken on this particular site. And again, I won't go into the whole history because I'm not here for they said, we said, all of that sort of thing. But we have been for a number of years now asking for a proposal or a plan for how the rest of the site might be developed out, which hasn't been forthcoming from Persimmon in that time. The reason we've been asking for that is because obviously we're not just looking at individual phases, although we are through applications. What we would like to see is how this impacts on the wider site as a whole over its 6 phases. So I would expect, and have been asking, and we are at a point now where we're getting a plan to show the number of houses that are going to go onto this entire site, i.e. all 6 phases, so that we then as the authority, working with Persimmon and with the tree officers from both sides, can then determine, well, actually, maybe there's certain groups that could be retained, maybe there's certain specific trees that could be retained because of their value, but we haven't had that entirety and that picture. And then to answer perhaps in a more straight to the point way, yes, there has been COVID and that's been an issue about going out on site, but more to the point, and I haven't got my tiny violin out here, but I've only got 2 tree officers to cover a massive area across 2 districts now, and this is a site that would take days, if not weeks, to get out and cover all and to look at all of the trees and to properly survey them, which, to be quite frank, we should have a survey from the applicant's trees expert, Mr. Milligan, which we have now, to show what trees were in those groups so that we can then make a considered view on the applications, which we are doing. And so we are left with the point of yes, it's 6 months after the original emergency TPO was served, but again, applications for tree works have gone up exponentially. At one point, they were up 95% on the year before. So quite frankly, we haven't necessarily got the resource to do this at the moment, unfortunately, hence why we are where we are with an area order. So it's a long-winded answer, but that's...
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Milligan, you wanted to ask.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I just wanted to say that with regards to TPOs, the sort of the main query is the appropriateness of an area order. I first surveyed this site back in 2014, 2015. The site was surveyed as individual groups, individual woodlands, and individual trees. That information has been available to the council since 2015. I think the point that Simon is trying to make is the appropriateness of the area order. At the very least, individual TPOs could have been put on those particular groups, and those groups do identify species of trees within them. And you can see that on the original survey sheets, etc., where it will state there are oak, ash, hawthorn, etc., etc. At the very least, those groups and woodlands and individual trees could have been served those appropriate tree preservation orders rather than a blanket area TPO.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Lawrence? Imogen, I'll come back to you in just a second. Sorry, Councillor Lawrence, who's your question for?
For either Ben or Imogen, depending on who knows the answer. In terms of just stated a number of TPOs and on individual groups and woodlands and trees, how many TPOs would that require for your team to process, and what would be the transactional cost as opposed to an area TPO? What kind of sort of difference are we looking at in terms of, for your own team, the amount of the difference in the workload, shall we say, or the kind of, the transactional cost, I suppose, on those two choices?
I guess that's for Ben.
Yeah, sure. So quite straight to the point, an area order would be much easier. It would be much less work, and we could put it out quite quickly. Doing the detailed one would take a significant amount more time, but that's what we would like to do. We just haven't got the time at the moment to do it. So I suppose the answer is we're still going to do that work. It's just not going to happen at this particular point in time because we haven't got the time or the resource to do it. Whereas we will have a bit more time afterwards, not necessarily the resource, but we'll have the time afterwards if the order is made, and then we can amend the order afterwards.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Gurney, I'll come to you in just 2 seconds. Alison, do you have anything? Is it your question for Imogen, or is it to make another statement?
It's basically to sort of be able to answer some of the questions or the queries that have been raised.
I'll give you a chance to do that in just a few minutes, but just let's go through. We now need to let the other members of the public have any questions for Imogen at the moment, and then we will come back to you. Okay, Councillor Gurney.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Imogen, I talk a lot to the residents who live adjacent to the area of the golf course as a local member and the county councillor, and I'm really concerned about the amount of wildlife there is on the site, and about the nesting season as well, and the reports of red kites and the reports of a lot of even newts, although they turned out to be smooth newts, but there are newts, and there are all sorts of little animals on there. There's muntjac deers at the moment. There's even fallow deer on there on the low road, and I'm just wondering how all this biodiversity and animal wildlife is going to accommodate this massive tree felling that we're seeing now in phase 2, which is, I think, decided at planning last week, 172 trees, of which 70 are A grade trees as well. And I'm just astounded by the fact that there is not you haven't mentioned about the wildlife and the significance of it, and also its correlation to the Helston neighbourhood plan. We haven't mentioned the neighbourhood plan yet from Helston. which is talking about green grids and biodiversity and wildlife areas.
Yeah, I agree. There's no doubt that there is going to be an impact on wildlife and diversity. You know, the development itself, by its very nature, is going to impact that. And we've been working really hard to implement a broader tree planting programme, which you know, will address some of those issues in the long term with the layout. And yes, you're right, you know, there will be an impact, but I think, you know, we've been working hard to retain the woodland areas around the sort of southern boundary coming up to the north of phase 3, I think it is, and then along the back end of that top section of phase 3. So trying to retain some of those wildlife corridors and connectivity, but you're right, you know, there's no doubt that there will be an impact.
Okay, thank you. And can I ask if any other members of the public have any questions for Imogen? No? Okay, thank you. Alison, did you have another question for Imogen? Sorry, you're on mute, you're on mute.
Yeah, it was just one. Obviously, when the Outline Planning Permission was granted, conditions 13 and 14 were imposed on the Outline Planning Permission and were seen as sufficient control in terms of tree retention removal. I'm just wondering what's changed now to warrant an additional protection of an area TPO that the conditions wouldn't cover.
Imogen, would you like to answer that, please?
Well, I think, you know, going back to what Stephen Milligan was saying about, you know, the information that was submitted, but, you know, we have made a number of changes to layouts to retain other trees. So it's, you know, as the phases have come forward, we've adapted to that. In terms of the sort of conditions and the planning process, you know, what's changed now, I think, is actually, you know, the sort of concern level has been raised with local residents. Really, you know, the full extent of what's happening on site has really become apparent when you know, this has come forward in detail. So yeah, I think that's why now is the right time.
But phase
Okay,
2 has
you.
only been developed in accordance with what was approved at the Outline Planning Permission stage.
Okay.
So
yeah,
bringing
well,
it's what was envisaged at Outline.
Yeah, it's still a different layout though. So it's, you know, going back to what Stephen said, you know, if we had served the order based on the groups of retained trees on the map that was issued with the outline, it wouldn't make any sense like with the new layout that's been approved.
Okay, thank you. I think that answers the question. Thank you very much. Okay, any further questions for Officer Mole, please? No? Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Imogen, for your time. We'll come back to you for your closing statement, as we will with Alison in just a little while. But we will now move on to other speakers on the meeting today. And would you like to start, Councillor Gurney, or would you prefer that we move on? Have you got anything else that you wish to put before the panel this morning?
Yes, but yes.
It is now. It is now.
I was wondering whether Sue Prutton, Councillor Prutton, wanted to speak.
No, she doesn't. She's just here for observation.
Okay. Yes, I would like to speak to it. Please.
Okay.
Right. I've got a copy here of the original planning minutes that went through on the 8th of June 2016. I think, Chairman, you were there yourself attending that meeting. And I wanted to draw attention to part of a paragraph which says, the committee, this is the planning committee, considered that the mature trees and significant changes in the levels within the site were a material factor and offered the opportunity to create a large housing development different to any other in Broadland area. As part of the negotiations, officers have ensured the retention of a number of mature trees on the site, together with new planting for future phases. And it was also noted within the woodland of phase 1, there were clearings amongst the trees, which would be suitable and effective places for providing trim trails, which were considered to be unobtrusive and an inclusive way of encouraging people to utilise the woodlands. So right from its inception and planning permission, the planning committee are recognising the uniqueness of this site, as did the parish council when we visited it. And I've been round it with a previous gentleman from Persimmon called Mr. Davidson, who gave the parish council verbal assurances that as many of the clusters of trees would be retained on site. And this is also rubber stamped by the recognition of the committee in saying the site is unique in its undulations and its trees. Now, Mrs. Cornish keeps talking about it being private and there's no amenity to the residents around there. Well, there may not be, but the amenity will be for those who buy those houses. And they're already starting to complain to me in phase one that they bought houses off a site plan that was indicative of showing far more trees than now is going to be retained, and how let down they feel by Persimmon over the fact that they like the idea of all these trees amongst these houses, and they were all felled, and they're all going to be felled. There's over 170 trees coming down in phase two, which got agreement last week. Now, the residents were concerned about the amount of felling going on, and that's why 3 councillors from Helsden asked Broadland to consider this emergency TPO. And this is to concentrate the situation. And for me, it gives more and more consideration of what's going on. So I wanted to actually draw to people's attentions some of the things in the report from the arborist and some of the research that Helsden Parish Councillors did, in particular one, when the original arboricultural statement was submitted. And then more recently, more detail about what was going on within tree clusters. Because if you looked at what was presented to Planning Committee in 2016 in terms of what trees were on the site, the information that's come out is that in some cases, those clusters are very different in contents to what was originally stated. We've got clusters of elder trees. Now, elder trees to some people have some worth, yes, and the berries make nice wine. But in the middle of these trees, what's missing is the finite detail about the oak tree standing in the middle, or the pine trees or the fir trees. So I've always been under the belief, and so have my parish councillors as well, although I speak as a district councillor at the moment, that there is some discrepancy between arboricultural tree reports and the contents, which conflicts itself. So I'm welcoming the opportunity that Broadland will have now to get some very, very accurate information about what is actually growing on the site, because this is one thing that has been amiss from the previous application. The current permissions on the site, I feel, are not robust enough to offer the protection that is required of the trees. And going back to the expectation from the planning committee that something was going to be designed and worked upon that was so unique and so different in Broadland, what we're seeing now is a mass felling of trees and lots of little ticky-tacky boxes going up everywhere, just like anywhere else that didn't have any trees on site at all and started off as an open space. So the opportunity to have built and designed out something very unique and very different is being not reached at all. I come back to the bit about the map. The map on the back of the pack, indicative of the master plan, is now from 2015 and is inaccurate in that it doesn't show where the Helsden amenity land is. In fact, the school in the corner of this map, I believe, is now in the wrong place. And it was decided at the time, the latest plan I saw was where the school and the parish land were adjacent to each other. And that was for a very, very reason, in that we were going to try and share the amenity of a car park for safer routes to schools and take the parent parking off the street. But that is shown on the last map, and I would like this confirmed from Mr. Burgess, that that is shown on flat land where currently the clubhouse stands, in order to minimise the felling of trees for parish land. So I'm saying to you this morning that I don't think your maps are up to date, and I think you're looking at maps that are not accurate and currently stand. And also, what you're also looking at is a map that indicates a lot of trees on phase 3, which are now going to be felled because of the drainage. So it is a moving feast, but the concern of the residents is, and I'm going to say it because I've talked to them, about unauthorised tree felling and someone getting on site and chopping down trees that they shouldn't. And this is not me speaking, this is the message from the residents. And they want to protect those trees so that they are discussed with the relevant authorities and they get the relevant go-aheads to fell. Because once you've taken a chainsaw through a tree, you can't glue it together again. That's the end of it. So the residents wanted this blanket tree protection order to make it more transparent in the process of how the trees were going to be felled, and there wasn't accidentally tree felling done and someone saying, oops, it's too late now, we've chopped them down. Now that's not my view. I have a different view. I might have some, I'm not going to express that view as a district councillor. I'm going to express it as a representative of the residents and the residents of Helston.
Okay.
So that is where we stand with this. So I would ask the committee this morning to rubber stamp this order for future, because I think it gives more protection to the wooded areas. It enables more transparent dialogue. It will then require more accuracy in what the tree clusters actually are and consideration given to them. And it will also hopefully settle some of the residents' concerns. Now, the other thing I want to talk about very briefly is the interaction with the Parish Council. Now, I know Natasha's here and she might well say this, but when we first started this train off in 2015, we did have dialogue with Persimmon, in particular with Martin, Mr. Davidson, who was very good and attended Parish Council meetings. And then the dialogue tailed off and went very stale, to the extent that the officers at Broadland had to literally force Persimmon to come and meet the Parish Council at the 11th hour. And I don't think that's a particularly good way of a developer trying to build a good relationship with a parish community. And I think that's a very sad situation that we have had, because prior to that, Mr. Davidson was very good at trying to motivate good, not always quality dialogue, but certainly dialogue. And he was a gentleman, along with Helen Adcock, that arranged for us to go on site, and we went round in the golf buggies. And I come back to the uniqueness of the site. I thought that Persimmon were going to be very innovative here, keep lots of trees. Yes, we knew trees had to be felled. We knew that. We knew that some trees had to be felled, but not this tree carnage we're seeing on site now, because that is what it is. And it's all about cramming the 1,000 houses on, to the extent that Persimmon even wanted our 2.2 hectares of land back the year before last. And for us to enter into a negotiated agreement with Norfolk County Council to share the school site. And I'm pleased to say that the Parish Council said no, but we are still short of our entitlement. We should have had 4 hectares of land and we're only getting 2.2. And this is because of the tree situation. We really, really need to save a lot more of these trees. To go back to the original comments made by the Planning Committee in 2016 about the uniqueness of the site, the undulations, the trees, and an opportunity here to develop and build something quite different, which I don't see happening at the moment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, and just for confirmation, we are aware that the maps that we've been looking at are outdated, and we have had the privilege of having the site visit, so we've seen everything for ourselves. So we are aware that the maps aren't as the site is at the moment.
Sue, I agree with you. However, they should have been right. This is a report that is flawed. They should have been right. 2015 maps, totally irrelevant. Moved on. They should have been accurate. I'm sorry. This is not good.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, Councillor Lawrence, do you have any questions for Councillor Gurney?
Yes, in terms of sort of the numbers of residents and sort of you talked of kind of can I just be clear, was it residents that have actually bought houses and are new to the site, or those that are existing residents, and roughly how many are you seeing kind of concerns from your residents?
I think there's a general concern from the whole parish of Helston about the site. There's certainly residents who live around the land, the Low Road, Hospital Lane, Middleton's Lane. We had to fight to save the trees on Middleton's Lane because Persimmon wanted to fell the mature oak trees there, and then they had to be told by officers that they had no jurisdiction to do that, and they were looking at the wrong trees. But in general, it is a consensus across the parish. The residents who are concerned are not newcomers by any means. They are established residents of Helston, 20 years, 25 years plus. And you only have to look at the amount of objections that were presented at the week before's planning meeting, to see that there were, I think, well in excess of 130 different individuals commenting on the application on phase 2 about the trees in particular, the poplar trees that are coming down, that have been there for years. I go back to, it's not just a few people, it is a vast number of people who are our parish meetings, our planning meeting at Helston High School before COVID many years ago. 90 people at that meeting came along, and the more concern was about the biodiversity, the green grid, the Helston neighbourhood plan, and saving as many mature trees as possible on site. I come back to, not only, Persimmon is saying there's no amenity there for the people of Helston. No, there isn't. To only when we drive past them at the moment, we can see them. They're very nice. They're full of birds nesting, but there is an amenity for those who are going to buy those houses.
Okay, lovely. Thank you very much. Okay, any other members in attendance would like to ask Councillor Gurney a question? Okay, lovely. Thank you very much, Councillor Gurney, for your time. And I believe that Tina Anderson, you would like to speak? If you could unmute yourself, thank you.
Thank you. I fully support everything that Councillor Gurney has said. I have lived by the golf course for over 35 years. I may not ever have had access to the golf course, but I could appreciate the trees and the wildlife, and the fact that it was a wildlife corridor. Trees support the climate, and that is, I just am so disappointed with Persimmon. In 2015, when we were invited to a meeting to talk about the golf course, we were told by Persimmon that the uniqueness of the site and the mature trees would be retained, which is exactly what Mrs. Gurney has said. And I have been over to the development site with a friend who was considering purchasing a house over there, and she was told that the unique undulation and all those mature trees are going to be retained. And that was their marketing strategy. I think that's probably all, because I'm getting quite upset by it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Councillor Lawrence, do you have any questions for Tina Anderson? No. And has anybody else got any question? Has anybody else got any questions? No, thank you very much, Mrs. Anderson. It's really appreciated. Is anyone else? Natasha, sorry, are you okay? You'd like to speak? If you could just take your video, and if lovely, thank you.
All right, I will. There you go. I was just actually wanting to confirm from Councillor Gurney, obviously the contact that the Parish Council have had from Persimmons. We had contact obviously recently, and that was on the 11th of December last year, so 2020, and that was the first contact we'd had, or first contact I had with Persimmon Homes. Obviously then that was with regards to the phase 2. Prior to that, the last correspondence that was had would have been back in 2018. And that was the last time. So there hasn't been any, it's just to confirm, there hasn't been any correspondence between Persimmon and the Parish Council for a couple of years on the site. So it was really just to confirm that.
Okay, thank you. And I think that Mr. Milligan would like to come back to Natasha.
Just to say, I met with Councillor Gurney on the 7th of the 1st, 2020, with regards to conifers and removal of conifers along the residential boundary of the houses on Hercules Road. And that was a meeting with Councillor Gurney, Mark Simmons, who is the current tree officer, and that was subsequently submitted and approved by Broadland District Council.
Okay, thank you.
Chairman, that is
Councillor
incorrect.
Gurney.
That is
Okay.
incorrect.
Okay, Councillor Gurney. I just give me a moment, and then you, if we let the others speak, and then I'll let you come back in once everybody has spoken. Okay, and Julie Packman, can I ask Sheena? Would you like to speak?
Sorry, Chair, could we just ask people to introduce themselves? Because I don't have a list of who's who, so I can just see names.
Apologies.
And I don't actually, I mean, I have no interest. I absolutely have no idea who's who. So I would really appreciate a little bit of a kind of, I'm so-and-so. Thank you.
Okay, apologies, Councillor Lawrence. Okay, Sheena or Julie, are you both going to speak or just?
Just me.
Okay, if you could please just introduce yourself. Apologies, I should have been asking that.
Hi. Hello, my name is Julie Packham and I live in Hercules Close, which backs onto the old golf course. I'm also speaking on behalf of Sheena Ems, who lives at the same address. We both support tree preservation order, which is currently on the former Norwich golf course, and believe that Persimmon's wish to fell the mature trees and coppices mentioned in the TPO is totally opposite to the plan set out in the Helsden Neighbourhood Plan. I fully support everything that Councillor Gurney has said so far. Mature trees are vital for our environment and are greatly used by the birds and wildlife for nesting and breeding purposes, and removal of the trees will destroy these habitats and greatly reduce the bird and wildlife population. We regularly see buzzards, we've had sparrowhawks, and at the moment the blackbirds which need to be nesting in these areas have drastic reduction in nesting sites at the moment. This land, previously owned by the Norwich Golf Course, has always been at risk of flooding in parts, and the removal of mature trees will only make this more likely to occur. It will remove the mature roots which support and sustain the land. It will reduce our air quality, which is already lowered by the building of the houses and the NDR, and it won't help with conserving water. The Helsden Neighbourhood Plan, section 4.11, already expresses concern over the lack of green space in Helsden and wishes to join up current green spaces for the benefit of the environment and the well-being of the residents, creating green highways. Now that Persimmon have gained the planning permission for the next phase of their housing development, removing mature trees, which we originally believed were to be left by them, will exacerbate these aforementioned problems and certainly won't help with air pollution or creating green areas unless the trees and coppices continue to be protected. The initial plans by Persimmon promised recreation areas, woodland walks and the retention of the natural landscape of the site, promoting the well-being of families and children. How will this happen if the green spaces and trees are removed? Walking in naturally mature environments and green open spaces is well documented as promoting good mental health. We are sure you're all aware of what the Helston Neighbourhood Plan states. Our question is, if it is not taken into account during these decisions, then what is the point of having it? The Helston Green Grid states that all new development proposals should contribute to the creation of a green grid. Developers will be expected to make provision for a long-term maintenance of their part of the green grid. Particular consideration should be given to avoiding the loss or damage to veteran or ancient trees, although we understand that some of these are not being classed as that, but they're not far off. In order to preserve the historic, ecological and amenity value, these trees need to be kept. This statement is why we can't understand why Persimmon wishes to remove the trees and how they can be allowed to do so. Saying that also, I've just picked up from this morning's meeting to say that the fact that the trees can't necessarily be seen from other areas does not mean that they are not of use to the people who are living nearby them. So even if you can't see them from other parts of Norwich, it's actually the local people that are being hit by having them removed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Lawrence, do you have any questions for Julie?
No, that's lovely. Thank you, Julie.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, and Councillor Lawrence, did I ask if you wanted to ask Natasha anything? Natasha is the parish clerk.
Thank you. No, that's fine. Thank you very much.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much. Okay, so has Councillor Gurney will, if no one else has got anything to say, then we'll go back to Councillor Gurney, please. Thank you.
Yes, Chairman. On a point of information, Mr. Milligan made reference to meeting me out on site, and with the greatest respect, I don't know what he's talking about. I never met him anywhere.
Okay.
I think he's got another councillor.
Okay. Okay, lovely. Thank you. Thank you for that clarification. Okay, so can I ask if anyone has got anything else that they'd like to put before the panel before we go into the closing speeches? Okay, Tina, you just need to unmute yourself.
Yeah,
and
sorry.
Tina, can you just
yes,
sorry?
My name's Tina Anderson, and I'm a local
you.
resident.
Thank you.
I would just like to say, if all these trees are going to be removed, what about nesting birds? What about the legality of felling trees during the nesting season? Will that be taken into consideration, please?
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, that's been noted. Thank you very much. And we will now go to the closing statements, and we will invite Imogen to make her closing statement, please. Officer Mole.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so the trees are important on site, and I think we can all agree that they make the development a nice, valuable amenity for the local residents and for the new residents. We're working hard to retain trees where possible, although we do recognise that planning permission has been granted. We're making the best out of the situation that we find ourselves in. We're ready to vary any order to reflect the trees that have been retained on site as part of phase 1 and now as part of phase 2. And we look to working towards having a much more close working relationship with Persimmons to achieve the best results in the future phases. It is important, though, that we do have some form of preservation order on site. We're already working towards sort of getting those tree work applications coming forward where necessary, and we have a commitment to that good working relationship. That was all.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. And Alison, if you would like to give us your closing statement, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to clarify on a couple of points before I go into the closing statement. We have been working quite hard over the last 2 years in putting together the plan that Ben referred to in terms of the overall master plan based on more detailed information to determine how many houses can be accommodated on the site, which areas of trees need to be retained. This has been further complicated by the site issues and the constraints on the site in terms of drainage, We also had to do a lot of infiltration testing, a lot of ground testing to see what actual conditions were underneath the building on, all of which have an impact on the overall development, and all have to be balanced alongside the tree retention. So it's not that we have ignored this request. It has taken us a lot of time and technical input to actually gather together all the information to be able to then come to the council and have basically well-informed discussions and agreements as to which areas of trees need to be retained and which can go based on other constraints that we need to take into account. So we are fully aware that that needs to be done. That is what we've been doing. In response to the sort of criticism that we haven't engaged with the Parish Council in detail, I've been with the company for 2.5 years now. I started on this site when I first joined the company. My plan was to go to the Parish Council once we had some detailed information to discuss with them and to share with them in terms of whether the master plan needed to be amended. As Councillor Gurney has alluded to, we've suggested the relocation of the school and the playing fields to give a better location for that facility. That is all work that's ongoing and has been informed by the technical information that we've been gathering over this time. So it's not that we're not willing to or keen to engage with the Parish Council in consultation. It's just the fact that I wanted to be well prepared and informed on the more detailed information we gathered together since the outline plan permission was granted, to be able to have meaningful conversations and to keep the Parish Council informed of the additional information we've managed to pull together. So I'm fully respectful of the engagement that we need to have with the community, and it's my intention to do that going forwards. But in our defence, for a reserve matters application for phase 2, it's not usual to have a full sort of public meeting with the Parish Council things just when you're proposing a reserve matters application. So that's just to clarify a few of the points that have been made. In terms of going forward and community benefit, what we're proposing as part of the development is to retain the woodland areas that we can, and that we will provide public access to those woodland areas for the community. We've been in discussion with Board and District Council as to whether the council will be wishing to take on those areas of retained woodland for public recreation, and we've recently been informed that the council don't want to do that anymore. So we will be setting up management companies, and the woodlands will be managed on the basis that they will be open for public use and public amenity value, and give public amenity value. So those are just a few sort of points I wanted to make to clarify where we're going with the development, and also to stress that it's not our intention to willfully remove trees we don't need to remove, and that it is our intention to retain as many of the trees on the site as we possibly can, and to work with the council to identify which of those trees should be kept and which have the best value and which contribute most to the amenity of the area. So it's not that we're just going in there with a bulldozer to demolish all the trees. We are fully engaged to retain as many as we can and to follow the due processes that we need to follow to ensure that that happens. So what I would suggest to stress is that we're not here to sort of debate whether or not individual trees should be removed. It's actually whether a TPO is the best means of achieving that ultimate goal. And if it is, what form of TPO is the best to serve that purpose. So basically, Persimmon would urge members not to confirm this order. As explained in the detail earlier and in written submissions, Persimmon positions as follows. The trees are already under good arboricultural management with effective dialogue with the council when works are required. No threat to the trees from the site which would merit an emergency TPO of this nature. As there is no emergency to justify the TPO, the expediency test at section 198 of the Town and Country Planning Act falls away. The majority of the trees on the site are not visible from public viewpoints and therefore make a limited contribution to amenity, which is the test under which the TPO is enforced or not. A number of the trees on the site are not of a condition which warrants TPO protection, and in any event, trees have been subject to assessment throughout the planning processes which have been ongoing for the last 6 years and which will continue to be so. In any event, the order in its current form is inappropriate as it covers areas of the site with detailed approval, namely phases 1 and 2. We have had a positive rapport with the council to date in discussing and agreeing which trees should be retained and which should be removed in order to deliver an appropriate number of dwellings on this site. As a result of many months of work, we have gathered a huge amount of detailed information on the trees on the site to aid these negotiations going forwards. Instead, Persimmon requests a positive approach and instead look to place TPOs on phases of the development once a detailed tree removal, retention and new tree planting is agreed on those phases as previously agreed with the council. This would have the benefit of avoiding the confusion of the area TPO protecting trees which have already been approved for removal and offer long-term protection to both retained and new trees on the site. What I would like to stress is that while some of the trees would need to be removed, we are including extensive replanting of new trees within our developments, as phase 2 showed, with us proposing to plant 235 new trees on the site. So we will be ensuring the biodiversity value of the tree cover is preserved going forwards. Thank you for your time today, and I'd like to stress that we're not saying we're not happy to have a TPO put on this site. It's just when it's put on and the form that it's put on in, and we'd welcome the opportunity to work with the council to get the correct TPO on the site for phases 1 and 2 going forwards. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Just bear with me, Councillor Gurney. Councillor Lawrence, is there anything that you would like clarification on before we go into discussion?
No, I think that's fine.
Okay. I just need to ask just for some clarification in relation to what Alison has just said. And I need the clarification from Ben. Ben, can you just confirm for me, please, on sites 1 and 2, the TPO is, the emergency TPO covers the area at the moment. The planning permission that's been given on site 2 or phase 2, just a couple of weeks ago, that will then counteract the TPO. Am I right?
You are right, Chair. Yeah, the TPO, the planning permission will override the TPO.
So for phases 1 and 2, the trees and the permission that's been granted is as it is, and then the rest of the TPO, if the panel should agree or disagree, will only affect the 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Yeah, well, yes and no. Sorry, we then get into a slightly complicated situation, so bear with me for a second. Obviously, planning permission has been granted and the trees, the properties are being built out on phase 1. And so they can form part of the TPO as well, because we know which trees are there.
Of course. Okay.
We're in a sort of, not limbo at the moment, but we're in this in-between bit where, yes, the resolution from planning committee has been granted for the phase 2, but it hasn't actually been issued yet because we've had to work through 1 or 2 things just to get it to that point. It will be issued very soon. So assuming it's issued prior to the TPO being served, then again, those trees within there, they'll be specifically protected by that TPO as well. So it does apply to the whole of the site, but we will know exactly where it applies in phase 1 and phase 2, if that makes sense.
That's great. Thank you. Councillor Lawrence, does that make sense to you? Okay,
sorry, yes, thank you. That helpful for that clarification. Thank you.
Okay, and we wouldn't normally, after there's been the closing statements, we wouldn't normally go back to people attending, but Councillor Gurney, you wanted to make a point of order. Sorry,
Thank you, Chairman. I'm obliged to you. It's a point of information, actually, from something Miss Cornish said about the management of the woodland areas. That has been offered to Broadland, and they have said no. And she then went on to say that they were going to set up a company to management, but forgot to say that actually they wrote to the Parish Council this week and asked them to take it and give us the commuted sum. So the statement about the management area, management team or whatever committee, she's unfortunately forgotten to say that she's asked the Parish Council to take them. And that will be an agenda item for the Parish Council, but we have always said in the past we didn't want them.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much. Thank you for that information. And I'm going to ask you now to please forgive us, but Councillor Lawrence and I need to leave you for a few minutes. We will go into discussion, and our host Jessica will look after you for a few minutes whilst we're in discussion. Jessica is going to put Councillor Lawrence and I into another room, and along with Officer Matthews, we will discuss and we will come back with our decision. Jessica, do you need them to turn their videos off or silence?
What I'll do is I'll put all of the participants back in the waiting room just while we're in the private session, and then obviously I'll rejoin them into the meeting once you're ready to give your decision.
Okay. Well, unless Councillor Lawrence has anything else that she'd like to state, we're good to go, I think.
That's fine. Perfect.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Jessica, it's up to you.
Yep, just bear with me one moment while I open the breakout room.
Are we back in the room?
Just need Karen to come back.
Oh. Is Karen still in the room?
What I'll do is I'll close the breakout room, and then that would
just in the room,
move her
yeah.
back in.
Yeah.
I've closed the room, so in 10 seconds she'll be moved back in. Once she's in, then I'll bring everyone back from the waiting room.
You're here. Good. Okay,
so,
thank you. Okay.
Yep, I'm just admitting everyone else back into the room.
Thank you.
Okay, everyone now should be back into the room now, Chair.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Apologies that it's taken us a little while to come back to you, but we did have a lot to discuss. Can I see Councillor Gurney? Oh, yes, I can. Yeah, that's fine. Thank you. We're all back in the room. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have discussed the situation, and it has, we have agreed that having regard to all the evidence available and to the criteria used to make the order, the panel have decided to confirm the Tree Preservation Order 2020 number 9. And we are satisfied the order has been served correctly, in that it was expedient in the interest of the amenity to make provision for the protection of these trees. There is no question that the trees subject to this order make a significant contribution to the local environment. They have significant amenity value to the residents. The trees contribute to the biodiversity of the immediate area and offer habitat to wildlife in the area. A number of the trees on the site are of cultural and historical value and can contribute enormously to the landscape and character of the area. However, we do accept that the planning permission has already been granted for up to 1,000 homes to be built on the site, and we will accept that there should continue to be good communication with the council's advocate and the developers to ensure that the site can be developed and the trees that are of significant interest to be preserved in line with the previous comments of the panel in relation to the visibility, historical, amenity and environmental impact. Thank you. That is the order of the panel. And I just need to advise, if any person is aggrieved by local authorities' confirmation of a tree preservation order, they may, within 6 weeks of that confirmation, apply to the High Court under Section 288 of the Town and Country Planning Act 1990 for an order quashing, or where applicable, suspending the order either in whole or in part. The grounds upon which such an application may be made are that the order is not within the powers of the Act, or that any relevant requirements have not been complied with in relation to that order. Thank you very much for your time this morning. That now